Good afternoon for everyone. My name is Hugo Carcagnolo, and I'm the chairman of this ordinary session of the second international workshop, which named Green New Developmentalism, Structural Change and Policy for Ecological Transition. This session is the ordinary session F, which title is Financialization and Premature Deindustrialization. We have four articles in the session. The first session is Why is Banking Spread High in Brazil? The Rentier Behavior of the Brazilian Banks between 2000 2020. The author is Bruno Lins from Le Monde Diplomatique Brazil. And Bruno, are you there? You can upload your presentation. Feel free to do when you want.
Okay. Let me share it here. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Great. Then, are you also able to see the presentation? Great. Okay. So thank you for presenting me. And before presenting, I would also like to say I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity of being here today. Beyond the pleasure, it is an honor to be here and to present to economists that were so influential in my personal and academic formation. Also, this paper is a work in progress, so comments, critiques are more than welcome by my side. So let me quickly begin by explaining the context from which this research came about. Mainly for those who are not Brazilians, Brazil is an emblematic financialization case in which a high interest rate, so the rate defined by the Brazilian central bank, has been benefited debt holders, and we can think about here about national banks, international banks, investments and pension funds, and so on and so forth. However, this reality has changed, and the real Selic interest rate has historically declined, becoming negative in 2020. And this then impairs a bit the Rentier interpretation of Brazilian banks relying on a high Selic rate, on a very high security income. And we decided to approach the declining Selic rate context by the fictitious capital framework, such as proposed by Cédric Durand in 2017. And according to the frame, there are three types of fictitious capital from which financial profits can be derived. They are public bonds, credit, and stocks. We then matched this framework with the fact that the two main incomes of the banking sector in Brazil are public bonds and credit. That being said, the question we rose from a rentier perspective was, can we see a compensation mechanism of incomes when the Selic rate declined? So is an increasing credit income compensating for security income losses? So all in all, the general objective of the research was to ask, can we trace the rentier behavior of the Brazilian banks during the later declining Selic rate context and credit expansion process? And to do so, we studied the sector's portfolio from 2000 to 2020, and income statement data were gathered to represent the sector as a whole. And our aim was to answer the following three research questions. First, is credit income increasing more than security income? We hypothesized that yes, credit income should increase more than security income during a declining Selic rate context. Second, is the Selic rate an important determinant of the security and credit incomes? Here we conjectured that the Selic rate is an important determinant. A low Selic rate should increase credit income relatively to security income. We hypothesized that the ratio between the variable is correlated to the Selic rate. And to confirm the rentier behavior of this sector, we also added the third research question. Is the spread income also responding to a declining Selic rate? And important to say that the third research question studies the variable spread income, because the spread income is the amount that the banks actually retain to themselves after the funding of costs are deducted from the total credit income. And if such a correlation is confirmed, this would give ground to a Rentier interpretation of financial profits, as a strong inverse correlation would indicate that an increasing spread income has been rising, such as to compensate a declining Selic rate and its effect on security income. We hypothesize that both variables are correlated. So to quickly talk here about the financialization phases in Brazil, the country has been classified as having two phases. The first one going from 1969 until 1994, and the second one from 1995 until 2015. And as the period that matters for us here is the second, I will quickly talk here about the main characteristics of the second financialization phase, which are two. First, during this phase, the financialization and the production rates diverge. And to quickly show about this first point, we can see here in this graph how the dark green bar, which is the production rate, and how the light green line, which is the financialization rate, how they diverge after 1994, 1995. The second characteristic is that a pro-conservative monetary policy convention is established, which means that a very high Selic interest rate was set to compensate holders of government bond, as we have also quickly said in the introduction. Now, to quickly talk about the implications of the financialization process for the Brazilian economy, the main one studies are three. And first, Brazil is no exceptions. Financialization exacerbate capital owners' preference for liquidity, keeping capital from remaining in the productive sector. So financialization exacerbates the industrialization tendencies and is a structural impediment to economic growth. For those interested in studying the deindustrialization subject, this subject has been largely studied by the New Developmentalist school. According to the authors, deindustrialization is a result of a problematic combination of financial openness, appreciation of terms of trade, and appreciation of the exchange rate. Then secondly, studies have also confirmed a relation between an increasing public indebtedness and the Selic interest rates, or to be more specific, that both variables, the internal debt stock and the accumulated factor of the real Selic rate, have a clear correlation. Third, during the second financialization phase, the Brazilian state had also delegated the social protection provisions to the financial sector. So in this regard, Lavina, in paper written in 2019, stressed that although social policy acquired scale in the 2000s, pensions, the healthcare system, and college education were expanded under the maximization of profits imperatives and worked according to the interest-bearing capital rules. Now, I'll quickly then talk about the Rentier financial class coalition frame, which is a frame that we actually aim to further develop here. It was constructed by Ecological and other economists, and it generally argues that the Brazilian financial system exposes a rentier behavior. And the primary assumption is that the coalition can influence the issue of bonds and monetary policy through two channels. The first channel refers to the relationship between the financial market and the national treasury, when during the negotiations of public bonds, the market pressures the treasury to issue bonds that favors their profitability, that provides edge according to the different macroeconomic scenarios. In this sense, it is important to stress that Brazil has a unique bond market in which a high number of securities are indexed rather than prefixed. And to show a bit this first channel, graph 1 plots the three main security bonds, the Selic index, the bonds that are indexed to the consumer price index, and finally the prefixed. And according to the authors, the graph shows how during times of greater economic stress, that the state issues more Selic index bonds, also known as the paper of crisis. And when inflation accelerates, the states issue bonds which are then indexed to the consumer price index. And this then clearly shows that holders of public bonds are pressuring the national treasury to issue bonds that favor them, providing edge for either interest rate risks or inflation risks, depending on the economic scenario. Now, the current challenges of this Rentier financial coalition framework is that the Selic rate, the nominal and the real Selic rate, has historically declined. Indeed, the new context compromises the core explanation of a rentier financial class coalition around a high Selic rate. The later context brings the credit expansion process, or better saying, the credit form of fictitious capital, to the center of the banking profitability debate. And from a rentier approach, it raises the question, are credit markups, the so-called credit spread, also high in Brazil? And once again, Brazil is here a worldwide exception. The country has one of the highest spreads in the world. As shown in graph 3, the interest rate spread in Brazil, so the blue line, is way above the average of upper middle income countries, Latin American and the Caribbean countries, which allows us to speculate if we're facing a political and rentier compromise around a high spread. Concerning the credit subject, the literature offers two main interpretations for the question, why is this credit spread high in Brazil? The first one is the post-Keynesian opportunity cost argument, which states that a high spread is also a macroeconomic implication of the high Selic rate. Banks have taken fewer risks from credit operations and practiced high credit spread due to the possibility of earning or increasing their income by just holding government bonds. The limitation of this argument is the following. It is incapable of explaining the recent years when the Selic rate declined while the spread rate continued at high levels. And to give an idea of this issue, from the theory, we should expect the two trends here, the Brazilian spread rate and the nominal Selic rate, to converge when the nominal Selic rate declines. This does not occur after the 2014-2015 period, when actually the space between the two lines increases. And second, the market concentration argument, which is based on the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, generally states that spreads are higher in concentrated banking system. In this regard, studies have shown that Brazil is no exception, and found a positive correlation between the market concentration and the spread. And the limitation here is that Brazil is not an exception in competition indexes as it is in the spread indexes. So we have a situation in which several other countries expose similar or worse level of competitiveness while having cheaper credit costs. Now we'll quickly engage in the case study to quickly talk about the general objectives and expected tendencies. I share here this table in which we're able to see what we expect during the period. So as we have seen, we begin with a high Selic rate and we finish with a low Selic rate. So we expect to see first a lower credit income in comparison to security income, and then towards the end, a higher credit income in comparison to security income. Concerning the spread income, something similar. We expect to see a low spread income and then a higher spread income. And from a determinant point of view, we expect the increasing spread income to be inversely correlated to the declining Selic rate. And if true, this would indicate that banks have indeed reproduced the rentier behavior during the declining Selic rate period. And more broadly speaking, we conjecture about the existence of a third channel through which the coalition operates rentier gains. Unlike the two formers, which are channels related to the bond market, as we have seen, the third channel works in the credit market, maintaining the rentier income when the Selic rate declines. How? By increasing the spread income. So to quickly outline, here are the variables that we use. Once again, it's important to stress that credit income and security income are by far the most relevant incomes of the banking sector through the period analyzed. The spread was calculated as the difference between credit income and cost of funding, and it does not include here taxes or operating costs. The two main differences of our study concerning past one is that we do not study the rate, but the spread income. And secondly, our research opted to cover an extended period to make a more historical analysis, so from 2000 to 2020. Finally, we propose the following processes. Security income represents gains derived from public bonds, credit income gains related to credit operations, and the spread income is the gain banks retain from credit operations after deducting the cost of funding. We use as source the IF.data system. The B1 business category was selected, which represents around 70% to 85% of the total net income. So it is fair to argue that it's a representative basket. Finally, time series were deflated by the national consumer price. Before answering the research question, we begin by showing that real net income has not been impaired during the period. Then indeed, we begin with the first research question, which is credit income increasing more than security income? And as we can see here, the hypothesis was confirmed. Credit income rose substantially between 2000 and 2015, while security income exposes no increase in tendency. Worth noticing that after the 2015 period, the two variables start to decline. So the crisis indeed affects the incomes of the banking sector. Then the second research question was, to what extent are the two main incomes of the sector related to shifts in the Selic rate? And to confirm the hypothesis, first, we calculate the ratio of the two variables and expose here in this table. And then, secondly, we match this ratio to the Selic rate. And as you can see, the results are exposed in graph 6. So as shown, the second hypothesis was also confirmed. The ratio of security to credit exposes a significant relationship with the declining nominal Selic rate. Then to give a general overview, graph number 7 shows the spread income variable, security income, and net income. And it allows us to grasp how the spread income increased during the time. It actually surpasses the security income in 2020. And to give an idea, the increase was almost about 8 times. Finally, the third research question tackles the markup theme. Is the spread income also correlated to a declining nominal Selic rate? And as graph 8 illustrates, the relationship point towards a strong inverse correlation. Here, the Spearman rank correlation was computed, and the result was at minus 0.87 coefficient result, which indicates that the more the nominal Selic rate falls, the higher the spread income in the banking sector. So to quickly here discuss the outcomes, our results allow us to argue that the Selic rate is a relevant factor for understanding the credit expansion process in Brazil. The spread income also seems to be responding to a declining Selic rate, and combining those 2 points, our data suggests the existence of a third channel through which the Rentier financial class coalition operates Rentier gains. When the Selic rate declines, the coalition uses its market power to increase spread income and compensate for security income losses. The post-2015 period is no exception. Financial institutions are, our data suggests that banks responded to the crisis by increasing their markup and shifting the onus to credit consumers. Finally, concerning the problems of social provisions being expanded through interest-bearing capital rules, our results offer empirical ground for arguing that financial actors cannot substitute public provision. They are actually impairing demand by practicing high markup and working against the idea of universal access. To conclude, the 3 hypotheses were confirmed. Banks increased gains by expanding credit operations. The strong relationship between the Selic rate and the ratio between security and credit income confirms that declining Selic rate was a relevant driver of the credit expansion process in Brazil. And finally, the data exposed a robust relationship between the increasing spread income and the declining Selic rate. The evidence supports a Rentier interpretation of profits. Past gains derived from a high Selic rate were replaced by spread income gains during the later credit expansion process. And here I finish with the last 3 slides exposing the references. Thank you very much.
Bruno, thank you so much for your presentation. Our next presentation is our next presentation will be provided by Edson Neto from the University of Brasilia. The article is Social Value of Mitigation Action, Taxonomy of a New Frontier to Financial System and Risk Analysis. So Edson, you can upload your presentation and and you have the word.
Thanks a lot to be here and to present my article. It's a great pleasure for me. My name is Edson Toledo. I am a PhD student in economics from University of Brasilia. My article is about social value of mitigation action, taxonomy of a new frontier to financial system and risk analysis. The motivation and the context for this paper, the crisis of climate change issues and post-COVID in one post-COVID 19th world makes the debate on the old concepts of social cost. You have a great work you make by household consumption and the capital formation. It's are understood as essential variable to encourage a country's economic growth process. Based on this premise, it can said that the financial intermediation system performs a relevant function for an efficient performance of these macroeconomics aggregates and in the whole economy. Our objectives here is to explore how the green wave induced by climate change and COVID-19 pandemic is transforming the role of financial institutions, as well as the entire policy and supervision and transparency of the financial system. It's very explored here. And on the other hand, you have a new taxonomy of environmental social costs. You have a traditional social cost of carbon and the shadow carbon price, and now you have a new social value of mitigation action. In this paper, we show the need for the new environmental macroeconomic theory. Let's go. In the negative externality concepts, you have the notion that the pollution is governed by the principle of optimal pollution or efficient level of pollution, derived from the neoclassical tradition, economics, and in the mathematically, it's the level obtained by solving the problem of maximizing the net social benefits from pollution, defined as resulting from the benefits of pollution, minus the damage that the emissions or the environmental damage that you have in the production and consumption. In the traditional Pigouvian concepts, you have an interpretation that we have a hypothetical markets for pollution when pollutant shadow price or pollution equilibrium price P is established, called the optimal level of pollution, or it's the same of implicit price of pollution. You have this traditional graphic with relationship with benefits and damage of emission. It's a traditional Pigouvian concept. In the other view, you have another kind of view of the traditional Pigouvian concepts of social costs. Another approach is the problem of minimizing abatement costs. And the interpretation is based on the fact that the reductions in initial emissions incur in abatement costs. The Pigouvian tax is characterized for the first best world that you can have, and the policies that you have the policies that we have the Pigouvian tax with instrumental work, you have a second best world. The traditional Keynesian concept of social cost, do you have approach the bargain solution for to an externality or to an environmental externality? The tradition is made for theory conception of Eleanor Ostrom, who actually criticized Harding and the tragedies of the commons theory. Also indicated that the different forms of private and common ownership, that you have this representative graphic that you have hours of music by my neighborhood to establish a price or a value for the silence time. An efficient result will be achieved by defining property rights to the generator of externalities, while people or companies affected by the negative effects would be interested in paying the issuer that stop the damage or the problem or the noise and the externality per se. We have a new put all this together. We have a new taxonomy of fundamental concepts. You have a social cost of carbon, can be defined as the social net present value of the increase in environmental damage from emission of an additional ton of CO2 over an optimal emission scenario. It's a Pigouvian view. The shadow price of carbon is the theoretical price used in the planning of private activities and investment, which adds a hypothetical charge to market price for goods and services that involve the emission of CO2 in their production. It's a cohesion approach. And now you have the social value of mitigation action. There's a kind of the economic environment value of voluntary mitigation action and its co-benefits for adaptation. You can put all together with health and sustainable development as directed to decided by the Paris Agreement in 2015. Excuse me. The theoretical necessity of the notion of social value to mitigation action as an anchor for policy signals emerges in the absence of the conditions under which the familiar notions of social cost of carbon and shadow price can be used to fix carbon price. The core issue is either the production frontier is considered to be fixed or moving in the path dependence or path dependent. You have one illustration for here that we have a social cost of carbon is a present social value of variation in the welfare allowed by decreasing or increasing a cap on emissions by one additional tonne. The emission cap is decided politically instead of the results from a full-fledged cost-benefit analysis. We can hear traditional Lagrange multiplier associated, and you have this representative in the curve of possibility production. You have a social carbon social cost of carbon here, and you have another kind of view that you have in another slide. It's the social the shadow price of carbon that can be interpreted as the willingness to pay for the 2000 two grays of hot temperature with a social welfare function U2 that will have an assembly of the two degrees of targets. It's a social shadow price of carbon. It's a cohesive approach. And the criticize of Stiglitz and Stern, it's the current levels of carbon price are insufficient to induce the abatement levels consistent with the temperature or objective of the Paris Agreement. And the future price will definitely have to be higher. And you can see the price of tonelade of CO2 for the 2005 dollar. You can see the all principal models that find the effects of carbon price. You have 200 $200 for a ton of CO2 by the average. The two approaches to macroeconomic policy emerge for this discussion. You have the new macroeconomic consensus. It's a framework with there is no rule to be played by the money markets and the financial system, with only single interest rate for to work. And you have the new Keynesians considered two key principles that price stability is the central objective of monetary policy, and the inflation is a phenomenon of aggregate demand. We have these two traditional view, but with climate risk and disclosure in the financial system, you have a new frontier that we can see. Unequivocal economic effects of climate change. The Financial Stability Board, an international body that established regulatory parameters for the financial system, created the task force for climate-related financial disclosure in 2015. This task force recognized the intensifying the economic impacts and reconsidering efficient capital allocation is light on the change demonstrates in activities that are less resilient to climate transition. We will experience low prices in the future. The combination of climate change effects on the returns of certain assets, it's the risk of valuation that disregard the issue, largely due to incomplete and insufficient information vision. Investors, lenders, and insurers need adequate information on how companies are preparing for a low carbon economy. Clear and consistent disclosure by corporations and financial institutions around the world is critical to the board of financial system. The task force on other initiatives that you have arisen in this time, it's the task force on nature related financial disclosure. The science-based targets network is another network created in the last years. The network for green and financial system, it's the more important in these three initiatives, that we have all the central banks meeting the experience to be placed in this network. The final remark that you can have, it's the linking climate mitigation pathways in the financial system. The Batstone, it's the economists from Zurich University working on a kind of two views that you have integrated assessment models, and you have another kind of models that work with establish the right portfolio of assets in a financial bank or financial institution. And Batstone assembled these two models to play on a kind of exchange of variables with this mindset working with risk, and this mindset working with carbon price. It's I think that it's a new great frontier that we have. The conclusion and final remarks that we can put here is the financial market must incorporate environmental sustainability in the consumption and investment decisions. It's the great important for financial markets. A new regulatory and behavioral frontier has been developing, which has hated the financial sectors and provided emergence of a new intermediation and service providers, as well as financial products, including digital assets, non-fungible tokens, and cryptocurrencies. The macroeconomic policy and the risk analysis of bank portfolio must be incorporated the climate risk, our source of risk, especially in a macro prudential mindsets. From a theoretical point of view, we need for a new pillars for the analysis of portfolio risk and for the macroeconomic policy per se, to accommodate as many types, many kinds of new assets classes, challenges with climate change, and new frontiers of two macroeconomic theory. The social value of mitigation action, it's a new approach, amplifies the traditional approach to incorporate co-benefits of mitigation action, which impacts social well-being by quantifying the benefits of over a given development low carbon economic pathway. Policymakers have designed public policy to control the GAG, normally with common and control policies with economic and voluntary instruments, but these microeconomic policies are not enough, how demonstrated by Stiglitz and Stern in this commission. Policymakers have designed public policy to control and reduce greenhouse gas, normally with but it's repeat. Sorry. Thanks for your attention. That's it.
Thank you for your presentation, Edson. We'll open the room for questions and debate after all presentations. Now we have the third presentation of our session, which will be provided by Francesco Linguanti from Sapienza University of Rome. Hi, Francesco. And his article is Inequality, Consumption, Emulation, and Economic Growth. Francesco, you have the word, okay?
Sorry. Can you see it? Okay, perfect. It is a great pleasure to present here this work resulting from my master thesis at the Sapienza University of Rome. The main focus of the research conducted with Professor Carlo Di Politi is on the issue of inequality in the New Keynesian growth models. over the last 30 years, inequality has increased both in terms of personal income and wealth distribution, and in terms of functional distribution. This has led many orthodox economists to study the effect of personal income inequality on growth. On the other hand, demand-led growth models incorporate functional income distribution, but fails to explain the effect of personal income inequality because they have no explicit theory of consumption. So, through the hypothesis of consumption emulation and thus modifying the saving function, we present a revision of the standard New-Keynesian models, trying to consider the possible interlinkage between personal and functional income distribution in shaping growth. There is an extensive literature on the institutionalist hypothesis of consumption emulation. Unfortunately, they have been neglected, mainly for ideological reason, I think. An exception can be found in the work of Carvalho and Rezzai, who assume individual saving to be dependent not only on individual income, but also on median income. Resuming the theme of the link between saving and relative income. The proposed model consider a closed economy. I don't know if you see the equation. Can you answer me if you see the equation in the slide? I don't hear you.
The screen's not printing your equation.
Okay, maybe I can share my screen instead of the presentation. Because
Okay.
the question is important, I think. So without the question...
Share your screen again without the option, upload the presentation, but share your screen. It's okay.
Okay. Okay. Now, you see the presentation? Do you see the presentation? Or...
Yeah, it is printing on the screen.
Okay. Yes, I say that the proposed model considers a closed economy with no public sector, and we sort individuals in non-decreasing order with respect to their income. We distinguish income into labor and capital component, profit and wages and wage. And the main assumption of the model is that the saving rate out of profit and wages is a linear increasing function of its position, of its percentile position in the income distribution. We can see sigma p times I sub n and sigma v times I sub n. We define aggregate saving as the sum of individual saving, and we call, as in Ranaldi, tilde mi p and tilde mi v the areas of concentration curve for labor and capital, in order to rewrite the saving equation as a function of the concentration of wages and profits. Tilde mi p and tilde mi v have a precise dynamics. They have an opposite dynamic with respect to the Gini coefficient or pseudo-Gini coefficient. They increase when the source of income moves towards the bottom of the distribution. So we have the definition of the saving by distinguishing the saving rate out of profit and the saving rate out of wages. And we use the Baduri's investment function and compute the equilibrium rate of capacity utilization. The rate of capacity utilization is defined as the ratio of actual to potential output. Standard Neo-Kaleskian growth model investigate the effect of the change in the profit share or wage share on the rate of capacity utilization. If an increase in the profit share generate an increase in the rate of capacity utilization, the growth regime is called profit-led. Wage-led in the opposite case. So we compute the derivative of the Z over the P, the profit share, and we can observe that the real new element of this formulation with respect to that of Baduri and Marglin or that of Blecker and Satterfield proposed here is that the derivative of the saving rate out of wages and profit with respect to the profit share can be different from zero. This possibility exists if the change in the profit share generate a different distribution of wages or profits. In particular, we define eta P as the derivative of the areas of concentration curve of profit with respect to the profit share, and eta V the area of the derivative of the concentration curve of wages with respect to the wage share. The model does predict that a more equal distribution of wages or profits generate higher rate of capacity utilization and then higher growth. This is true for any growth regime considered, both profit-led and wage-led. Our idea in the work is to explore how this change in the profit share is spread within the population, within the income distribution. As the research proposed here shows, this process is not obvious. Moreover, as Ranaldi and Milanovic demonstrate, the conclusion may differ depending on different countries considered. We in this plot we show the relationship between the Z over the P and Z, the rate of capacity utilization. Remember that if this derivative is greater than zero, the growth regime is profit-led, wage-led in the reverse scenario. Both cases can occur in the first figure, depending on the value of Z, like the Baduri and Marglin model. The second figure deserves more attention. We will see in the next slide that SP minus SV is greater than zero, although with small values. So the second inequality will be easily verified if eta pi is greater than zero and eta v is smaller. That is, an increase in the wage share leads to a more unequal distribution of wages and profits. In this specific instance, the slope of the line is positive, the derivative is always positive, and this means that if an increase in the wage share decreases personal income inequality, the growth regime must be profit-led. Okay. Our empirical analysis focused on Italy. This graph shows the concentration curve of wages and profit. As can be seen, profits are less equally distributed than wages, but their concentration at the top of the income distribution has increased over the last 30 years. This is underlined in the next slide, where the area of under the concentration curve of wages is shown in blue. So we perform a first exploratory analysis to check the relationship between the saving rate, here defined as the ratio of individual saving to individual income, and the individual percentile position in the income distribution. Then we perform a linear regression analysis and for each year. And then we constructed a panel data and a pseudo panel data in order to estimate the coefficient using the fixed effect model. We can say using the area of concentration curve seen before and the estimated coefficient sigma p and sigma v, we can compute the different propensity to save. Here we have the result. The different propensity to save. The empirical result support the post-Keynesian hypothesis that the saving rate out of profits is greater than the saving rate out of wages. At this point in the work, we came up against the insufficient availability of data. While we have a long time series available for macroeconomic variable, the same cannot be said for the micro data from Bank of Italy surveys. In any case, we have tried to. Sorry. In any case, we have tried to using variation to obtain proxies of the derivatives in order to be able to evaluate each variable in the final equation of the model. Thus, we have tried to obtain a first estimate of the growth regime of the economy, and we compare our result with the direct estimate of the Z over the P. The model seems to show good predictive capabilities. However, the main difficulty lies in the computation of Z. Z, as I have just said, is defined as the ratio of the rate of capacity utilization, and is defined as the ratio of actual output to potential output determined by available capital stock. So the potential output is obviously difficult to estimate. This is why we have decided, starting from our model, to reconstruct in an indirect way the values of Z. The result support the hypothesis of a scenario far from full employment and show a decreasing trend from 2002. Let us summarize what we have just seen. We developed a neo-Kaleskian growth model to investigate the interplay of functional and personal income distribution and their impact of growth. We derived the condition for an economy to be wage-led or profit-led, finding that the more an increase in the wage share leads to a more unequal distribution of wages and profit, the more the profit regime, the growth regime is profit-led. We empirically test models prediction using data from the Banks of Italy survey on household income and wealth, and finding support for the assumption of the model that the saving rate depends on the percentile position in the income distribution and on the income sources. Finally, the model overall exhibits good, though not perfect, predictive capacity for the Italian economy over the period 1980s to 2010. Thank you. Then we have the references. That's it.
Francisco.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Okay.
Okay.
I stopped the share. Okay.
Thank you so much for presentation. Now we have my presentation, which is the last presentation, and after that we will open the room for questions, for debates. Okay, so let me upload my presentation. One moment, please. Okay. Can you see my presentation? Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. Okay. Is it working? I think that we have a problem, a communication problem.
Hugo, everybody can see your presentation on the screen.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Let's go. Good afternoon for everyone. My name is Hugo Iasco-Pereira, and I'm here to present my article, which is ongoing research, which was written with my co-author, Paulo Morcero, who is not here, but I will present the paper, okay? So yes, my presentation follows the structure of my article. So we have five topics in my presentation. The first one is the introduction. The second one is a historical discussion on the structural change in Brazil. When we will I will discuss with you. I will display a graph, an important graph for my arguments. The first section, in the first section, I will discuss the empirical procedures adopted in our econometric regressions. In the fourth section, I will discuss the econometric results of our estimates. And in the fifth section, I close my presentation with the concluding remarks. So, structural change is an important part of the explanation of why some countries are richer than others, or why the long run performance is better in some countries than in others. This is pretty clear to the heterodox economists, like I think that like us. In this sense, industrialized economies are those more developed and with a faster pace of economic growth, as the British economist Nicholas Calder has indicated in his seminal studies. There are various arguments in literature that justify such proposition. Industrialization induced sector integration within the product structure, as well as capital accumulation and technological progress, induced the creation of qualified jobs, leading to a greater labor productivity as the industrial activities absorb workers from non-industrial activity. With this in mind, with considering the importance of the productive structure to understand the long run performance of countries, the goal of my paper is to comprehend the macroeconomic determinants of structural change of the Brazilian economy from 1947 to 2021, as well as its consequence in terms of change in labor productivity and in total factor productivity. Someone can ask, why are we using the total factor productivity? We are using the total factor productivity because we want to show to the economists, to the or thought to mainstream economics, the economists, that the product structure matters. Okay, so I think this and used to the industrial labor productivity. Basically, what is have that the Brazilian industrialization occurred between the 40s and the 80s when development-oriented policies were adopted. I think that this graph is pretty clear to show this. The blue area, this area with the blue area, represents the periods of Brazilian industrialization, while the red area represents the periods of Brazilian deindustrialization. It's clear that industrialization of the first period has been reversed since the 80s. We can see that we have the peak of industrialization in Brazil, and after the 80s, we have a strong decline in importance of manufacturing activities in terms of GDP. I think that the minimum value is the most recent value in 2021. The situation in Brazilian economy is dramatic. We have a giant coefficient of imports because we do not have a domestic activities to produce what we consume. I think this is a dramatic situation, especially in periods of the world experience a situation, an exogenous devaluation in exchange rates. All right. So the peak of industrialization in Brazilian economy occurred in the first half of 80s when 27% of GDP was compounded by industrial production. From the 80s onwards, there has been a consistent decline in this variable, reaching its minimum value of 11% in 2021. So we have a deindustrialization process since the 80s. I think that other important aspect that we can get from this graph is the possible and strong positive correlation between structural change towards the manufacturing activities and public investments in Brazil. I mean, the industrialization in Brazil has a strong connection with the public investment. Okay, I think that at least graphically we can check this point. But our goal here is empirically estimate the influence exerted by macroeconomic factors upon the Brazilian productive structure. So we performed two sets of time regressions. The first set of econometric regressions aims at to understand the macro determinants of structural change, which were represented by two variables. First, the manufacturing GDP as a share of total GDP, and second, the employment in manufacturing activity. And the second set of econometric regressions aims at to understand how these macro determinants, as well as the structural change, influence the total factor productivity and the labor productivity of manufacturing activities within the Brazilian economy. We estimate our regressions performed to explain the structural change were estimated in a log linear functional specification. Both equations are presented below. These are our equations, where the dependent variables are the industrial share of GDP and employment and manufacturing activities. The independent variables are the real exchange rate, represented by RER, infrastructure, represented by infra, and the ratio of capital and labor, represented by this ratio, inflation, productivity, and terms of trade, represented by TOT. In turn, the log linear our regressions performed to explain the total factor productivity and labor productivity were estimated in a log linear functional specification. Once again, here we have our equations, TFP, total factor productivity, real exchange rates, infrastructure, the rate of capital labor, industry, and you have the same variables to explain the labor productivity employed in manufacturing activities. Our database, we combined various variables from different sources. We try to maximize the number of years contained in our sample. We know that we have various periods, different periods concerning the macroeconomic regime of Brazilian economy between 1947 and 2021, but our methods is appropriate for that. Here I show the dependent variables. I will not present these in details because we don't have time. The economic method, you use our regressions were performed using the autoregressive distributed lag ARDL co-integration analysis and ARDL bounds testing approach. This method is the most appropriate one because it allows the use of variables integrated of order 0 or variables integrated of order 1, or a combination of both. This is very important. It's newest methods. A small sample is not a problem. Variables are used in different lags, which improve the efficiency of all our estimates. Estimations are performed with a single equation instead of a system of equations. Our econometric regressions were performed using different combinations of dependent variables to check their robustness. So we combined various equations with different combinations of independent variables. This is very important to check the robustness of our regressions. Not all combinations are associated with a co-integration relationship. I mean, we are interested in the long-run relationship, not in the short-run relationship. This is very important. This is a strong relationship between our variables, which is required to obtain meaningful estimates. So we presented only regressions that rejected the null hypothesis of the bounds testing procedures. Okay. Here we have our results. Let's talk about our empirical findings. Our regressions have fitted well. The lag numbers of variables was chosen according to a criterion of information. The Brecht-Pagan test indicate a non-correlated error term. The bounds testing procedure pointed out the existence of a long-run relationship between our variables. So we are not talking about the short-run relationship as the VAR models or a simple correlation. We are talking about a long-run and strong relationship between our variables. The estimated parameter for the speed adjustment towards equilibrium was negative and statistically significant as expected. And so let's talk about our results. Table 2 presents the regressions estimated to understand the macro determinants of structural change represented by the variable industrial share of GDP. I'm presenting only the parameters of long-run multipliers because of the limited time and limited space, and because this is our major concern in this time of model. The results The results presented in Table 2 indicated that, first, the estimated parameter for real exchange rate is negative, so that a more competitive real exchange rate is positively associated with industrialization of Brazilian economy, while a non-competitive real exchange rate helps to explain parts of the Brazilian industrialization. In turn, the estimated parameter for our variable infrastructure has been shown positive and also statistically significant. Then this indicates that investment in infrastructure fostered industrialization. Further, the estimated parameter for the capital labor ratio was also positive and statistically significant. So expanding the stock of machinery in relation to employed workers is part of the explanation for Brazilian industrialization, as reduction in these variables are associated with Brazilian industrialization. Okay. Table 3 presents the regressions estimated to understand the macro determinants of structural change represented by the variable industrial employment. So here, if in Table 2, I use the industry as share of GDP as dependent variable. Here, I'm using the employment in manufacturing activities as the measure of structural change. Once again, we have a negative and statistically significant estimated parameter for the real exchange rate, for the variable real exchange rate, which means that a competitive real exchange rate is associated with increases in employment manufacturing activities. In its turn, we have that estimated parameter for this variable infrastructure is also positively associated with our dependent variable, which means that expanding the investments in infrastructure fosters or increases the employment in manufacturing activity. So this is increasing investments is very important these times of as a counter cycle measure. Okay, so now we have the table 4. The table 4 presents our estimated regressions to explain the total factor productivity. The real exchange rate is not statistically significant in all regressions that we performed. We can see that. This indicates that the real exchange rate is not very associated with increases in total factor productivity, at least directly. But I highlight the term directly because we found that real exchange rates may affect the total factor productivity because the variable industry, which is the share of industrial GDP in relation to total GDP of Brazilian economy, was positive and statistically significant, which means that when we pursue when you get a competitive real exchange rate, we increase the share of manufacturing activities in productive structure, which leads to a greater value of total factor productivity. Infrastructure, once again, its parameter was positive and statistically significant. So policies of expansions of expanding infrastructure has a positive effect on total factor productivity. We have that the estimated parameter for the ratio of capital labor is also positive and statistically significant. And going to the conclusions, this is my last table. Table 5 presents our estimated equations to explain the manufacturing labor productivity. Our results indicate that estimated parameter for the variable real exchange rate statistically significant and negative, which indicates that a competitive real exchange rate increases the productivity of labor employed in manufacturing activities. And further, our results also provide some evidence suggestive that increasing capital labor ratio or infrastructure are associated with a greater productivity of labor employed in manufacturing activities. So let me close my presentation. Let me finish my presentation. This article, as you could see, this article is an effort to comprehend the drivers of structural change. And when you talk about structural change in Brazil, we should have in mind that we can talk about industrialization, but recently we have a structural change, a regressive structural change towards non-industrial sectors, which is the industrialization of Brazilian economy. So we tried to comprehend the drivers of deindustrialization and deindustrialization. This is very important for Brazilian economy, and its consequence in terms of industrial labor productivity and total factor productivity. I think that this figure provides a good summary of our results. We can see that we have an effect over the real exchange rate, over the we have an effect over the product structure and a competitive real exchange rate, and increasing public investments, better infrastructure, and a better capital labor ratio induce industrialization, which in turn leads to a greater total factor productivity. And second, we have the other part of the story is the effect over the total factor productivity and labor productivity, as long as the competitive real exchange rates and increasing public investments, better infrastructure, and an enhanced capital labor ratio foster the total factor productivity and total factor productivity of Brazilian economy and labor productivity, and vice versa. To sum up, the pursuit of a competitive exchange rates, expansions in public investments and in infrastructure, as well as increments in capital labor capital labor ratio, induces the industrialization of the Brazilian economy, which leads to a greater TFP and labor productivity. We have a direct and an indirect effect. The adoption of development-oriented policies is a part of a consistent industrialization strategy, and this showed parts of a development strategy for Brazil. I conclude my presentation. Thank you so much. This is my mail, and this is it. Now, we open the room for a debate, for questions. So now we have all authors in the screen. Okay, yes. Okay. Yes, now we open to the audience to make questions, to debate between us. This stuff that happened in conference. So yes, it's open. I have a question for Francisco and one for Bruno. Francisco, I'm not very familiar with the concept of consumption emulation. I would like that you explain in a few words what is the central idea of consumption emulation. I think that this is very important concept to the institutionalists, economists from the beginning of the 20th century. But I think that it should be very very good if you explain in a few words. And Bruno, I have a question for you. Which is the relationship between the expansion of consumption of workers in Brazil between 2000 and 2016 after the coup in Brazil? I ask this because there are some workers in literature that points the importance of income distribution to works as an important variable to explain the increases in spread of banks. So if you could explain, if you can speak what do you think about this, it will be nice too. So yes, you have the question.
Sorry, just a question. You mean the increasing consumption of? Sorry, I didn't listen.
Of workers of. Yes.
Okay. I will allow Francesco to answer first, please.
Okay. The consumption emulation has a long history from I think, for example, Veblen and his famous book. Then I use a lot for our paper the work of Dasenberry in 1949. The idea is that we can link the conspicuous consumption of Veblen with the theory of Dasenberry. Dasenberry uses our hypothesis, so that the saving rate is dependent on the position. This is not our invention, because in the 1949 there is this hypothesis. So the saving rate depends on the individual position in the income distribution, and this leads to at the bottom of the income distribution, the consumption is higher with respect to their income. So if the saving rate is lower, the propensity to consume is higher, and this means that an individual with a lower income want to consume more than the other individual in a position in the income distribution above him. So he want to consume more because he want to show he want to move her social position, its social position, like that of the individual higher in his position. So I know that this concept is not very clear, but when we have two individuals in different position, the individual in the lower position in the income distribution want to consume more than the other. This is the concept of the consumption emulation. The idea is that the empirical result support this hypothesis, but it is often neglected, and so that's it.
So to then answer the question, by my side is an author that has been studying this relation between the increasing consumption and the finalization regime is Lena Lavinas. And the main idea is to stress that although consumption has been increasing, and here we're thinking about the periods of the Labor Party, actually, this has been occurred with the increasing financialization regime, which has been increasing the markup. So the finalization process has been increasing inequality in that sense. And for example, I remember, I think it's worth observing here that normally we see the inequality graph as a Gini coefficient decreasing during the Labor Party. But other studies have shown that actually when you take into consideration the very upper middle class, the distance has actually increased. And that's exactly a bit the point when we think the inequality from a financialization process, because indeed this specific markup has been going upwards and really being retained by this very specific elite. So I think this is how we could relate those 2 points.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have any question to each other? Okay. I have a question to my work. Patini asked me, Hugo, I have mixed feelings about using TFP, talking about structural change in heterodox context. Yes, I agree with you, Patini, but we don't have a good proxy for labor productivity, and you this is a restriction of the database in Brazil, and I totally agree with you. We should be more careful about this variable. Okay, thank you so much. Despite your argument to show the mainstream that structural change matters, don't you think it's contradictory? Yeah, yeah. For a mainstream economist, I think this does not make any sense because they don't believe that structural change matter. But I think that I'm providing some results to to a mainstream economist that look at this. I don't believe in TFP, but you believe. And I'm showing that the structural change matters in the determination of TFP. I don't believe in TFP. I totally agree with you. But we don't have a better proxy variable to represent the labor productivity or technological change. I totally agree with you, Patsani. This is a delicate point, and we are like thinking how to be more careful with this variable. Okay, so in the paper we call the attention of our for our argument that saying, oh look, TFP is a delicate idea for us. We know that, but we don't have a better variable to measure what you want to measure. Okay. Yes, this is what I have to say. Do you have more questions? If you don't have more questions, I declare I would like to finish this session. It was a great pleasure to see friends of other countries to listen your presentation. Thank you so much. Does anyone want to say something to the audience?
Thank you for everything, Hugo, for organizing our panel here. And yeah, that's all by my side.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And so goodbye for everyone.